car door shut, and I heard the gravel crunch under the tires as they pulled away. I didn't move right away. I thought maybe they forgot something. A jacket, the water bottle my son-in-law had been carrying. Something. I sat on the old wooden fence post at the edge of the trailhead and waited. The engine sound faded into the tree line, and then there was nothing. Just wind moving through the pines and a crow somewhere above me making that sound crows make when they're watching something they don't understand. That's when I knew. I want to go back a little, because what happened that morning didn't start that morning. It started about 18 months earlier, when my daughter brought him home for Thanksgiving and announced they'd eloped in Reno the previous June without telling me. His name was Scott. He had one of those smiles that worked hard, the kind that took a second too long to arrive and left a second too soon. My daughter? I'll call her my daughter throughout this because that's what she is, whatever she's done, had always been the quieter of my two children. Careful. A little closed off. I used to think that was my fault, something I'd missed when she was young. Now I think Scott found exactly what he was looking for in her. I was 67 years old at the time all of this began. Retired school teacher, 31 years in the Fresno Unified School District, mostly 4th grade. My husband, Ray, passed from a stroke 8 years before. The house was paid off. I had a pension, Social Security, and a savings account I'd been careful with my whole life. Not wealthy by any stretch, but comfortable, stable. That word, stable, is what I think drew Scott to our family in the first place. The first year after they married, things were mostly fine. They lived 40 minutes away, came for holidays, called on Sundays. Scott was between jobs, he said, transitioning from one industry to another. Something about logistics and freight management. I didn't press. My son, who lives in Portland with his family, mentioned once that Scott gave him a bad feeling, but my son has always been protective of me in ways that can tip into suspicion, so I didn't put much weight on it then. The changes came slowly. My daughter stopped calling on Sundays, then stopped calling unless I called first. When I did reach her, Scott was usually somewhere in the background, and the conversations got shorter. One Christmas, she didn't come at all, said she wasn't feeling well. I drove out to check on her, and Scott answered the door and told me she was resting and it wasn't a good time. I stood on my own daughter's porch and was turned away. I drove home in the rain and sat in the kitchen for a long time after. By the following spring, my daughter started bringing up my finances in ways that didn't feel like concern. Small things at first. Had I looked into estate planning? Did I have a financial advisor? What would happen to the house if something happened to me? She used the phrase peace of mind a lot, said she just wanted to make sure everything was in order. I had a will. I'd had one since Ray died. My son and my daughter split everything equally. I told her that. She nodded and said maybe I should update it with a proper trust. Scott, she said, knew an attorney. I didn't use Scott's attorney. I used my own. A woman named Carol who'd done our family's legal work for 20 years. But I did agree to review my will, and when I met with Carol, she gently asked me how things were at home, how my daughter was doing. Carol had been around long enough to recognize when a client was being circled. She updated my documents, added language she said was protective, and told me to keep a copy somewhere my family didn't have access to. I put one in my safe deposit box at the credit union. I didn't tell anyone I'd done that. The camping trip was my daughter's idea, she said. A weekend at Shaver Lake. She called me on a Tuesday, cheerful in a way she hadn't been in months, and said Scott thought it would be good for all of us to spend some time together. Some fresh air. She said she missed me. Those 3 words undid a lot of my caution. We left on a Friday morning in Scott's truck. My daughter sat up front with him. I was in the back with 2 duffel bags and a cooler. The drive up into the Sierra Nevada was beautiful. The kind of October morning that makes everything look like it belongs in a calendar. I watched the elevation climb on the highway signs and felt, for the first time in a long while, something close to hopeful. We didn't go to Shaver Lake. Scott took an exit I didn't recognize, and when I asked about it, he said he wanted to show me a viewpoint he'd found the summer before, something off the main road. My daughter didn't react. She was looking at her phone. We drove on Forest Service roads for about 20 minutes. No other cars. The pines got thicker and the road got rougher, and I made a joke about his truck's suspension that nobody laughed at. He stopped at a wide spot where someone had cleared a small area, probably for equipment at some point. There was a fence post at the edge of the clearing, and beyond it, the land dropped into a ravine and then rose again into tree-covered hills that went as far as I could see. Scott said to come look at the view. I got out. My daughter stayed in the truck. I walked to the fence post. The view was real, I'll give him that. Miles of nothing, and it was genuinely beautiful. I turned around to say so, and Scott was already walking back to the truck. He said, "Just sit here a minute. We'll be right back." And then the door shut, and the gravel crunched, and they were gone. I want to tell you what that silence sounds like. Not peaceful. Not like the silence in a church or the silence after a piece of music ends. It was the silence of being erased, of being set somewhere and forgotten on purpose. I sat on that fence post for maybe 20 minutes because some part of me still believed there was a reasonable explanation. A bag they'd forgotten in town. A call they needed to take. My mind ran through every possible innocent version of what had just happened because the real version was too large to hold all at once. When I finally accepted that they weren't coming back, I did an inventory. I had my jacket. I had a granola bar in the pocket I'd forgotten about. I had no phone. Scott had offered to charge it in the truck on the way up, and I had handed it to him. I had no purse. I'd left it in the footwell of the back seat. I had my glasses and the clothes I was wearing and one granola bar. I did not sit down and cry. I want to be honest. I wanted to. There was a moment where I felt the weight of it trying to pull me down, and I thought about Ray and thought about how tired I was. But I'm a woman who spent 31 years managing 24 9-year-olds at a time, and somewhere in that training is a reflex that kicks in when things go wrong. You assess. You move. I knew water runs downhill. I picked a direction based on where I could hear what might be wind through a lower canyon, and I started walking. The terrain was steep in places, and I'm not 20 years old. I slipped twice. My left knee, which has been giving me trouble since I gardened too hard the summer before, made itself known on every downhill step. I found a long branch that worked as a walking stick, and I talked to myself while I walked. I told myself about every student I'd ever had who'd surprised me. I listed the names of all the state capitals. I recited the recipe for my mother's lemon icebox pie step by step. You do what you have to do to stay present. After what I think was about 3 hours, I heard a road. Not cars at first, just the particular kind of quiet that happens near pavement, different from forest quiet. Then a truck, far off, and then the road itself, a 2-lane county route. I came out of the brush about 50 yards from a wide shoulder and stood there looking at it like it was something from a dream. I walked to the road and stuck out my arm. The third vehicle that passed stopped, a man about 40 in a flatbed loaded with fence materials. He took one look at me, scratched up, limping, hair everywhere, holding a stick, and got out of the truck without saying anything and opened the passenger door. I said, "I need help." He said, "I can see that." He didn't ask me a lot of questions. He gave me a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels and turned the heat on even though it wasn't that cold. He asked where I needed to go, and I said the nearest town, and could I borrow his phone? I called my son in Portland. He picked up on the second ring. When I told him where I was, what had happened, there was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Mom, don't go home yet. Go somewhere public and wait for me to call you back." The man in the truck dropped me at a gas station in a small town. He gave me $40 from his wallet and would not hear any argument about it. I have thought about him many times since. There are people like that in the world, people who don't make you explain yourself before they help you. He was one of them. My son called back within 20 minutes. He had talked to Carol, our attorney, who had talked to a colleague. The advice was, do not contact my daughter or Scott. Do not go home alone. Document everything. the scratches on my arms, the state of my clothes as soon as possible. I used the $40 to buy a meal at the diner next to the gas station. I asked the woman at the counter if she'd take a photo of my hands and arms with her phone and send it to a number I gave her. She didn't ask why, she just did it. A woman from my church, Deborah, drove 2 hours to get me. She brought clean clothes and a phone charger and didn't speak much on the drive home, which was exactly right. I didn't stay at my own house. I stayed with Deborah. That's when I started learning what Scott had been doing while I was in the woods. Carol's colleague had connections at the county recorder's office. 3 weeks before the camping trip, a quitclaim deed had been filed transferring my house into a trust I had supposedly created. My signature was on it. I had not signed it. My daughter had a notarized power of attorney document also containing my signature that I had also not signed. They had not declared me dead. They were smarter than that, or thought they were. The plan, as best Carol and the investigator she brought in could piece together, was to get me lost long enough, maybe find a way to declare me incompetent, maybe just wait until I didn't resurface, while the paperwork did its work quietly. The house was the main target. It was worth $420,000 in that market. My savings account had also been accessed once, a small amount, likely a test. The life insurance angle wasn't their primary play. I had a policy, a modest one, that named both my children as beneficiaries. But the house was where the real number was. I want to stop here and address something directly because people ask, why didn't I just go to the police right away? I did. The same night Deborah picked me up, we went to the county sheriff's office. I gave a statement. The deputy was polite and took notes and explained that without more evidence, a property dispute involving a family member and what could be characterized as a misunderstanding about a hiking trip would be difficult to pursue quickly. He suggested I contact an attorney. I already had one. What Carol told me was this: if I moved too fast, Scott would lawyer up, and we'd spend years in civil court trying to unwind the deed while he drained whatever equity he could. If I was patient, 2, maybe 3 weeks, we could build a case that gave the district attorney something they could actually charge. 2 to 3 weeks of being legally homeless in a house I'd owned for 22 years. I agreed. Deborah's guest room has a yellow quilt that had belonged to her mother. I slept under it for 19 days, and I did not sleep well any of them, but I got up every morning and I did what Carol asked me to do. I signed a sworn affidavit about the camping trip. I had a forensic document examiner review the quitclaim deed and the power of attorney, both forgeries, her report confirmed with a high degree of confidence. I sat with the investigator and walked through every conversation I could remember with my daughter over the previous 18 months, every comment about finances, every meeting Scott had suggested. My son flew down from Portland on day 4 and stayed in a hotel nearby. He wanted to do more than he was allowed to do, and it was hard for him to accept the pace of it, but he trusted Carol. On day 12, Scott filed an insurance claim. Not on my life insurance, on a renter's insurance policy he'd tried to take out on the property, listing himself as owner. That was the moment the district attorney's office got genuinely interested. It was also the moment I stopped worrying. The arrest happened on a Thursday. Carol called me while I was at Deborah's kitchen table eating scrambled eggs and said, "They picked them up this morning. Both of them." Scott on charges of forgery, fraud, and filing a false insurance claim. My daughter on the forgery charge. I finished my eggs. The hearing was 6 weeks later. I wore a dark green blazer I've had for 15 years, and I sat 3 rows behind the prosecutor's table. Scott looked smaller than I remembered him, which I've since learned is a common experience. My daughter looked at me once when she was brought in. I looked back at her, and I didn't look away first. The judge reviewed the forensic document report, the investigator's findings, and the insurance fraud filing. He called what Scott had done, and I'm paraphrasing his words, a calculated scheme to defraud a vulnerable senior citizen of her primary asset through document forgery and deliberate abandonment. He did not use soft language. The quitclaim deed was voided. The fraudulent power of attorney was struck from the record. My house was restored to my name in full. Scott was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. He would be eligible for parole consideration after 2. My daughter, because she cooperated fully with investigators once it became clear how serious the charges were, received 3 years of probation and community service. She also had to attend a court-mandated counseling program. I did not speak at the sentencing. Carol asked me if I wanted to submit a victim impact statement, and I thought about it for a long time. In the end, I decided that everything I had to say had already been said by the evidence. The facts were enough. My son drove me home from the courthouse. We stopped for lunch on the way, a diner with those plastic menus and booths with tears in the vinyl. We ordered the same thing we always ordered when he was a boy, and I took him out for special occasions. Patty melt with onion rings. He said, "You okay?" I thought about that for a moment. I said, "I'm going to be." When we pulled into my driveway, my neighbor across the street, a retired postal carrier named Ed, who's watched over this block for 30 years, was out raking leaves. He raised his hand at me. I raised mine back. I walked into my own house and stood in the kitchen for a while without turning the lights on. The late afternoon sun was coming through the window over the sink, the way it always does at that time of year. That particular angle that hits the countertop and makes the old Formica look almost like something nice. I've seen that light 10,000 times. People ask me if I've forgiven my daughter. They ask it like it's a simple question with a clear, right answer, and I understand why they ask, but it doesn't work that way. What I feel toward her is complicated in ways I'm still working through. I don't hate her. I'm not sure hate is something I'm capable of when it comes to my own child, but I also know that what happened was a choice she made, more than once, over more than a year. She didn't drift into it. We don't speak. She sends a card at Christmas, which I don't open. My son says that's my right. I believe people should face the consequences of what they choose to do. I believe a 70-year-old woman deserves to sleep in her own house under her own name without that being something she has to fight for. I believe the $40 a stranger handed me in a gas station parking lot in the Sierra Nevada is worth more than anything Scott ever told my daughter he would give her. That fence materials truck never did come back into my life. I don't know the man's name. If he ever watches videos like this one, I want him to know that I think about his kindness regularly and that it mattered more than he probably understood at the time. I still teach. Not in a classroom anymore, but I tutor kids after school 2 days a week through a community program. 4th grade, mostly. Same age as always. They are still, somehow, exactly the same age as every 4th grader I've ever met. Curious and loud and trying hard to look like they're not scared of anything. I recognize that. My house is still mine. My name is still on the deed. The window over the kitchen sink still catches the late sun the way it always has. And some evenings, I stand there and let it land on my hands. And I think about the fence post at the edge of the ravine, and the crow, and the silence, and how I got up anyway. That's the part I want people to hear. Not the courtroom, not the sentencing, not the numbers on the deed. The part where I got up off the fence post and I started walking, because what else was I going to do? That's the part that was always mine. I keep coming back to the fence post. Not the courtroom, not the moment Carol called to say they'd been arrested. The fence post at the edge of that clearing with the ravine dropping away in front of me and the sound of Scott's truck already gone. That's the moment I return to most, because that's where the whole thing was decided, not by a judge, not by a forensic document examiner, but by whether I was going to sit there and wait to be found, or whether I was going to get up. I got up. What Scott and my daughter built their plan on was the assumption that I was the kind of person who wouldn't. They looked at a 67-year-old retired school teacher with a bad knee and decided she was a problem they could simply remove. Leave her far enough out, take her phone, let the mountain do the rest. It was, in its way, a calculation, and it was wrong because they had calculated the wrong thing. They measured what I didn't have. They forgot to measure what I didn't. I've thought a lot about what actually carries a person through something like that. It isn't luck, though there was some of that too. The man in the flatbed, the $40, Deborah answering the phone. It's something quieter. It's having lived in a way that gave you something to draw on when the drawing was necessary. 31 years of showing up for other people's children. 31 years of deciding every single morning that the work mattered even when nobody was watching. That kind of life doesn't leave you empty when things go wrong. It leaves you with something underneath. That's what Scott couldn't forge. You can counterfeit a signature on a quitclaim deed. You cannot counterfeit the thing that makes a person get up off a fence post at the edge of a ravine and start walking toward the sound of a road. The consequences that followed were real and they were just, but I don't think they came from nowhere. Scott made choices that compounded on themselves. The manipulation, the forgery, the insurance fraud filed while I was still officially alive and living at Deborah's in a guest room with a yellow quilt. Each decision he made was built on the previous one, and each one required a little more recklessness than the last. That's how it works when the foundation is dishonest. It doesn't hold weight. Eventually, you file a fraudulent insurance claim on a property you stole from your mother-in-law, and that's the thing that makes the district attorney's office pick up the phone. My daughter is another matter and a harder one. She wasn't reckless. She was, I think, afraid of him, of disappointing him, of whatever he'd told her about herself over the years they were together. I understand that better than I wish I did, but understanding something isn't the same as excusing it. She made choices too. She signed things. She stayed in the truck. The tutoring I do now, the fourth graders who come to my kitchen table on Tuesdays and Thursdays with their reading workbooks and their fidgety energy, I think about them more than I used to when I was just teaching for a living. I think about what I'm actually trying to give them. It isn't multiplication tables, though, that too. It's the habit of doing things right even when doing them wrong would be easier. It's the belief that their own minds are worth trusting. It's the understanding that hard things can be gotten through, not because someone rescues you, but because you decide to move. Those three things, knowing right from wrong and choosing it anyway. Using your head when your heart is breaking and refusing to stop when stopping would be easier. I spent a career trying to plant them in other people's children. Turns out I'd planted them in myself somewhere along the way. The window over my kitchen sink still catches the afternoon light. My name is still on the deed. I still get up.